What's up, everyone? Glad to be back. Marcus Peters versus Amari Cooper. Both of them were first-round picks last year. Both of them had fantastic rookie seasons. Of course, both of them went to the Pro Bowl, and both of them will be fighting it out for the AFC West crown in 2016. So I went back and looked at how they played against each other directly last season to see who got the upper hand and who projects to be the better player going forward in their matchup. Because believe me, they're going to see a lot of each other over the course of the next several years. And when I did look at the tape, I came away with one overarching conclusion. The Chiefs are misusing the hell out of Marcus Peters. Clearly he's a very good player, I'm not saying he's not, but his own coaching staff in Kansas City was handicapping him on almost every single snap because they weren't using his best skill set. When Peters was coming out in the 2015 NFL Draft, I had him as my 5th overall rated player in the entire class, which was higher than most pundits had him, but I was a believer in his tape. He was the best pure press corner prospect, in my opinion, to come out of college since Patrick Peterson. He had length, he had toughness, he had technique, he had all of it. What Peters was not, however, was an elite athlete. He didn't have great footwork in a back pedal, he wasn't very vertically explosive, he didn't have great long speed. Physically speaking, he was more of a Richard Sherman, Josh Norman kind of guy, rather than a smaller, quicker off-cover corner that can play in space like Kevin Johnson, who also came out that same year. And by the way, Johnson was my 4th overall rated player in the entire class. So why this is a problem for Peters is because almost every corner in the league is going to have a very specific skill set and work better in a certain scheme rather than others. Peters in particular is a much better press and press bail corner than he is as an off corner. That's just how he's built. So it was really surprising to me when I watched the film versus Amari Cooper to see the Chiefs lining him up 9 yards off the receiver on what seemed like over 80% of his snaps. He's just not that kind of guy, and he's never going to be that kind of guy. He's not built for that style of play. Peters is at his best when he can use his length and get his hands on people and beat them up with physicality. But when you give that much space to a receiver, your chances of ever actually being able to touch them are slim to none, especially when they're as fast as Amari Cooper, who's a legit 4-4 guy. And I'll show you why the Kansas City coaches were probably hesitant to have him press and slide into trail technique before I get into his off-cover skills. So as a press corner, if you don't get a clean jam at the line of scrimmage and slide into that receiver's hip pocket, you become immediately vulnerable to deep speed. Marcus Peters is a 4-5 guy, and like I said before, Amari Cooper is a 4-4 guy. Whether it's in gym shorts or whether they're in pads, Peters is never ever going to win a foot race with Amari Cooper, so putting him in a position to lose a foot race against Cooper is not something the Chiefs want to do. And you can see why in this snap from the 4th quarter of their Week 13 game against Oakland. They really didn't start putting Peters in press until late in the game, and almost immediately the Raiders tried to get Cooper over the top of him because Peters just straight up does not have the extra gear that Cooper has when he's trying to get downfield. Now the ball luckily sailed out of bounds because Derek Carr took a hit on the throw, but Cooper undeniably beat Peters on this one because of that difference in speed. That's what they're afraid of. Now, playing between 7 and 10 yards off with that much cushion does tend to help with defending the deep ball, and that goes double for playing in zone looks out of that alignment, because you can then just pin your eyes to the quarterback and play the ball. But the problem is that you take away the deep ball at the expense of allowing literally every other part of the route tree to be completed, especially the underneath stuff. If you don't have a corner that can actually play off coverage and close on the underneath throws while also defending the deep ball, it's not going to work. Great example of that, 4th quarter in Week 13 again. Peters is 9 yards off of Cooper in man coverage. Cooper's running a 15-yard dig route with a speed cut, meaning he's really rounding his cut and rolling his hips into it rather than fully breaking down and changing direction. And that helps maintain speed through the route, hence being called a speed cut. But anyway, he wants to get himself a ton of space to make the speed cut work, so he uses Peters' biggest weakness against him in a way that really only great route runners do. About 4 to 5 yards into his route, he stutters just a little bit as if he's running a hitch. Now that in itself isn't really special, but keep in mind what that little stutter means to a corner like Peters. He knows he's not as fast as Cooper, and he knows that the Raiders are eventually going to try to exploit that difference of speed with a route like a stutter go. Stutter goes are known to eat up those 9-yard cushions really easily because they force the corner to stop and then restart when they see the route isn't actually a hitch, while the receiver's moving at almost full speed the entire time, still eating that cushion. The stutter go is the bane of an off corner's existence because if you get caught biting on that hitch and you give up that cushion, the receiver's going to blow right by you down the sideline. So that's the fear that Peters is working with here. He's thinking stutter go because that's a great route to get rid of his cushion immediately, and that goes double because he just really isn't that fast to begin with. So as soon as he sees Cooper come out of that stutter, look at Peters' hips. He's starting to flip and run immediately because in his mind he's thinking, shit, it's the stutter go. I need to get over the top of this thing right now or I'm going to get burned. And that's exactly what Amari Cooper wants. He knows that Peters is going to panic after that first move because he has no choice but to panic. He doesn't have the luxury of not panicking because he doesn't have the recovery speed to test his luck. Once Peters flips his hips, this route is over. Cooper's speed cuts underneath him and he's wide open. Derek Carr ignores him for whatever reason and instead targets Latavius Murray for a 3-yard loss. But make no mistake about it, Cooper shredded Peters in off coverage here because Peters does not have the specific physical skill set to survive as an off corner. Literally the next play after that, one snap later, I'm sure Cooper told Carr in the huddle, hey, I'm beating the shit out of this guy over here, please throw me the ball. And Carr does exactly that for a 23-yard gain. Again, he gets Peters with a double move, a post corner this time, and Peters can't do anything about it because when you're that far off and you're giving that much runway to a wide receiver, you really have no shot of getting your hands on them. And Peters is the kind of corner that needs to be able to make contact with his man to keep up with a double move like this. He is not fluid and explosive enough to naturally flip his hips and transition from a post to a corner when he's all alone in space. Now, if he's sliding in a trail technique and he's in the hip pocket of the receiver and he's got that point of contact that he can grab and get himself back into position, yeah, he can defend this route all day. But out in space, he gets roasted all the time because he's not a good enough athlete to survive out here. A couple snaps later, same thing. He's giving Cooper a ton of space and he can't keep up with the speed cut. That's a free 15 yards every single time. And to me, if I'm a Chiefs fan, it's absolute bullshit that 13 weeks into the season, his coaches are still putting him in this position. They should know by now that he's not an off corner, but they're still making him play off. It's infuriating. Going back to that post corner, they ran the exact same route against him later in the quarter for another big gain. Peters was lined up only about 5 yards off this time, but again, that's too much space for a corner with his skill set. Look at his back pedal. Look at how high that is. He's clearly not as comfortable in a back pedal because he never really did that in college. He was exclusively a press and press bail corner at Washington. They didn't have him pedal and flip, so he's not used to it. So as a result, he's really flat-footed and off balance while trying to stay with the double move, and again, it's another 18 yards. In week 17, they did start putting him a little bit more in bump and run, a little bit more catch coverage. And catch coverage, if you don't know, is the kind of middle ground between off coverage and press coverage. You're 2 to 4 yards off, so you can get your hands on the receiver a little bit earlier, but you also have a little bit of cushion to work with against deep speed. However, if you're going to be coming up and challenging guys from a catch coverage alignment, you need to actually do it. Peters had a few snaps in catch coverage where he was just trying to get over the top of the route and do what's called stacking the route, which is all fine and dandy as long as you're still getting your hands on the receiver as soon as humanly possible so you can stay with the double release and save yourself if they're not actually trying to release downfield on a deep route. Again, he can be as close as possible, but if his hands aren't actually on creating a point of contact, he's never going to keep up with Amari Cooper breaking inside. Physically, he cannot do that. And that's what happened here in the second quarter. Peters is stacking over the top of the route, but he didn't get his hands on Cooper, which is the biggest part of stacking in the first place. He's just trying to mirror the release and wait for the route to develop. So all Cooper had to do was stem Peters a little bit outside towards the boundary, and when he cut back inside underneath him to position himself for the break on the post route, Peters couldn't do anything about it because he didn't have that hand on for a point of contact where he could slingshot himself back into position. For a bigger press corner, it is almost impossible to transition from an outside stem to an inside stem out there in space without grabbing onto a receiver. You're moving backwards, they're moving forwards. So when Peters never got a hand on him, he was dead in the water from the start. He had no shot at defending this route. Now, fortunately for Peters, Carr again missed on the read. He was locked into Michael Crabtree on the other side, which probably cost Oakland a big gain. But this is still a good illustration of Cooper, on the whole, winning both of his matchups with Peters despite not really having any amazing stats to show for it. And to be honest, that was actually kind of an annoying problem I had with the Raiders tape against the Chiefs defense in both of their games last year. Cooper was open way more often than Michael Crabtree, but Derek Carr just missed him or wasn't looking his way a lot of the time. Cooper, just looking at the tape, he should have had north of 200 yards in both of these games. But it seemed like everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Carr missing reads, Cooper dropping passes, and he did have one of the higher drop rates in the league. The offensive line didn't protect well because the Chiefs have a really good front seven. The run game wasn't keeping things on schedule, again, because the Chiefs have a really good front seven. When the Raiders offense went back and looked at the film for both of these games, they probably felt sick to their stomachs because Cooper was running free for at least 3 or 4 long touchdowns. And Carr just flat out never saw him. That stings if I'm a Raiders fan, and I'm not, but if I was, it would suck. But now they know, at least for 2016, that this Chiefs coaching staff are going to keep putting Marcus Peters in all this off coverage, and he's going to be an easy target. And I say that with all due respect to Marcus Peters because he is a really, really good player. His coaches just aren't using him right. When he was doing what he did great in college, lining up in press coverage, jamming people at the line, challenging receivers with those long arms, he was fantastic. In fact, I venture to say he was one of the better press corners in the league when he was actually pressing. Cooper and Crabtree both could not get free at all, but the Chiefs just didn't really use him as a press corner for the vast majority of his snaps in these games. Fourth quarter of Week 13, he's pressing on Cooper, and when he breaks inside, he's got his hands on him. He's not lost in space on that break. He's able to get into position and undercut the pass because he had that point of contact to keep up with him. Derek Carr makes a beautiful throw with pinpoint accuracy, but Peters is in such a good position to contest the pass that Cooper doesn't have a clean look at the ball and he can't make the catch. It bounces up in the air and it's picked off for a touchdown. Those points went on the board for Kansas City because Peters was allowed to challenge his receiver. He wasn't giving him any breathing room and he kept himself in position to contest the throw and make it as hard a catch as possible. That's what he does. That's why he was my 5th overall rated player. When Marcus Peters is pressing receivers at the line of scrimmage, good things happen. But unfortunately, the Chiefs just haven't quite realized that yet. And until they do realize that, Peters is going to keep getting burned by Amari Cooper, Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, all these other elite receivers that, from a route running standpoint at least, can run circles around him in space. I understand that Peters got 8 picks last year, that he was a Pro Bowler. I get all the hype and all that. But when you sell out against the deep ball from a schematic perspective, you kind of give up all hope of stopping anything else. He probably isn't going to be giving up a ton of 50-yard fades or anything like that, sure, but as long as he's still lining up 9 yards off, he's going to be giving up literally every single other route in the tree anyway, so who really gives a shit? So they've got a decision to make in Kansas City. Do they want Marcus Peters to get beat once or twice a game on 9 routes that may or may not be completed, or do they want him to get beat a dozen times a game on routes that are almost always going to be completed? To me, that choice is an easy one. Alright, that's all I got for today. I'm not sure who my next video will be on. I'm thinking I might take a look at a new face on a new team, perhaps some preseason tape, maybe a little bit of both. We'll see. If you'd like to donate to the channel and help me get a little bit closer to being able to do these full time, you can find the link to my Patreon account. Any amount of donations would be wonderful. And to everybody who has already donated, really just a huge heartfelt thank you. It really means a lot to me, especially to be able to potentially do this as a full-time gig in the future. Doing this would be my dream job, and you guys are helping make that possible, and I really do thank you. So until the next video, later.